In about 1 mile, turn left onto Benton Road.
Stopped at a Wendy's together, just collect our thoughts in the car. We chilled for an hour just talking, and I dropped her off. Francesca and I have stayed in contact for years. How we romantically evolved
Fuck.
for 3 months.
Parents,
But just
sir.
friends. Neither of us ever returned to that hospital again. It was Christmas Eve night. We always hosted Christmas Eve at our house when I was a kid. My grandparents, uncles, and my cousins would always come. This year I must have been like 12. My mom was making duck, as she always did on Christmas Eve. I was helping her cook and prepare this year because my dad actually had a really bad cold and was trying to not touch anything or stay too close to anyone. Our family slowly started showing up one by one.
At the next stop
My Uncle
sign,
Joe
turn
first
left.
with my cousins Chris and Valerie. They were the closest in age to me, so I've always been closest with them out of all my cousins. As soon as they got there, I got distracted from helping out my mom, because Chris brought over a video game for my PlayStation that I'd been wanting to play, Driver 2. We ran upstairs to my room to put the disc in and play, and Valerie came just to watch. But within a few minutes, my mom called my name up the stairs angrily, ruining the fun. I was hoping she'd just let me play, but she was already stressed from the amount of work that
At the
cooking and
stop
preparing for a
sign,
big
turn
family
left
is.
onto Benton Road.
So we had to resume playing the game later. We left it on pause, and all 3 of us went back downstairs. Most family had arrived already. I was juggling saying hi to everybody while helping set up the table and stuff. Within half an hour, the whole family was there, and dinner was almost ready. The table was already set, and half the family was already at the dinner table, including myself. Then I remembered my mom yelling, "Ah, shit." She yelled for me to run to the basement to
In
grab
about
stuff
8
and
miles,
she forgot
turn
to
right
leave.
onto Lost River
Our house
Road.
didn't have an actual pantry closet, so my mom used the backside of the bar in the basement as a pantry. I went down to the basement to fetch the stuffing. I was behind the bar looking for the damn stuff, when I noticed a blanket covering something in the corner next to the 2 sofas. At first glance, I assumed it was a person, one of my cousins hiding, trying to scare me. As I walked a little closer, I could confirm it was a person based on the shape of what was underneath the blanket. I could see the person's head. I stood there waiting to see if they'd react to my not making noise. I was wondering how he or she would know when to jump out to scare me if they couldn't see me under that blanket. Suddenly the lights to the basement turned off, and I heard the basement door slam shut. I yelled "screw you" to whoever it was, Valerie or Chris. I knew it was one of them, not my older cousins. I was going to scare whoever was under the blanket. I had a feeling the 2 of them were trying to mess with me, but now the joke was on them. I was going to scare whoever was under that blanket. I tiptoed on the carpet to the corner of the room and yanked the blanket off whoever it was and started screaming to scare them. But instead of hearing one of my cousin's childish screams, I heard nothing. Then a very strong grip grabbed me. Whoever it was went for my neck as soon as they felt where it was in the dark. For a few seconds I thought it was Chris roughhousing me, and I was screaming at him to stop, but this felt like the grip of a grown man. I started to scream for my life with whatever air was able to escape my lungs. The door to the basement opened and the light turned on, revealing an old, dirty, disheveled-looking man. He let me go and ran to the basement door which led to the backyard, not the basement door that led to the upstairs. Half my family came rushing down. I was crying and screaming he went that way, pointing at the open backyard basement door. 2 of my uncles ran outside to try to find him, while my mom and aunts came to my side to try to comfort me as I was crying. I was literally shook. My whole body was shaking and I felt ill. My mother called the police to report this. My uncles were out in the streets for like 20 minutes looking from house to house for the man. It made no sense because it didn't look like he would have been able to make it too far, which makes me think he was hiding somewhere in the backyard or a neighbor's yard. The officer said it sounded like some homeless squatter hiding from the cold, and that they'd gotten a number of these calls that month. That didn't make things sound any better after that allegedly homeless man had his hand around my neck. My cousins were trying to pull a prank on me, hence why they turned the light off and shut the door originally. But this was obviously not part of their plan. So my family learned a valuable lesson at my horrifying expense. Always keep every single entrance to your house locked at all times. was Christmas Eve night. I was a little kid. My dad was briefly dating this woman named Sydney. My mom died when I was really young, so for most of my childhood, I didn't know what it was like having a motherly figure in the house. When my dad started seeing Sydney, she would spend the weekends at our house once in a while, and my siblings and I liked that. Sydney always seemed like a decent woman, but I was a little kid, and I was perhaps biased because I just liked having a woman in the house. It was Christmas Eve. Sydney was spending the weekend with us for Christmas. I don't think she had much family herself. We watched the movie Elf as a family, my brother, sister, dad, and Sydney. After the movie ended, my dad and Sydney went to bed. I stayed up with my brother a little later to watch the Polar Express. Around the time the movie ended, Sydney came downstairs to tell us that it's maybe time to go to sleep. I was young, but I was old enough to be suspicious about Santa Claus by now, and I had a feeling it was always my dad putting the gifts under the tree. I went to my room to play video games for a few hours. I snuck out of my room around 12 o'clock to see if the presents were under the tree yet. My bedroom was the only bedroom on the den level, so every other bedroom was upstairs. The living room and tree were on the first level, a half flight of stairs above my bedroom. I snuck out of my room and tiptoed up the stairs. I peered into the living room, which was lit up by the Christmas tree. There were presents under there, and there was Sydney under the tree. At first I thought she was placing the gifts there, and I thought I was right all along, that Santa wasn't real. But I quickly realized she wasn't placing the gifts there. She was shaking them, like trying to figure out what's inside of the boxes. She picked up one gift, which was in a gift bag, started digging through it, pulled out something that looked like it was for my sister, like makeup. She analyzed it and put it back in the bag. I didn't know what she was doing, but I kept watching. I saw her walk to the kitchen and go to the ledge where my dad keeps his wallet. What I saw next, I couldn't believe. She went through my dad's wallet and took out a few bills and put it in the pocket of her pajama pants. I kept watching as she went into the cabinet above the ledge, the medicine cabinet. She took out what looked to be one of my dad's prescription medication bottles. She started analyzing it. She opened it, sniffed it, and then looked to her left, right at me. It was as if she was about to do something very bad and was checking that the coast was clear first, and she saw me right away. Her eyes widened, and she put the bottle back in the cabinet. I hurried down the stairs back to my room and crawled into bed, with my little kid mind thinking I somehow could still pretend to be asleep. Seconds later, the door creaked open and then shut. I didn't look, but I didn't know if she entered the room or not. A few minutes passed, and I finally felt it was safe to check if she was gone. I looked up, and Sydney was standing right over my bed. I gasped and almost screamed. She looked down at me. All I could see was the silhouette of her figure, making the sight of her even creepier. She said she saw me watching her, and said in this angry whisper that she wasn't doing anything wrong. She just wanted to make sure my dad was taking his medication. I replied, okay. She said Merry Christmas and left the room. The next day, after we opened gifts, my dad came into the living room angrily and said, "Who took $60 out of my wallet?" I looked at Sydney right away, who glanced back at me as if she knew that I knew. At that moment, I didn't tell my dad what I saw. But later that day, when my dad was still angry at my siblings and I, thinking one of us did it, I told him the truth of what I saw. My dad didn't believe me at first, but when I told him that she was going through his medication too, he started to believe me, because why would I lie about that? Later that night, this created for a rather loud conversation between the two of them. But shockingly, my dad didn't ask Sydney to leave. She didn't admit to stealing his money, and I think my dad simply didn't know what to do. That night, I had my bedroom door locked, which my dad always told us to never do. And I just felt safer with it locked that night, and thank God I did lock it, because around the same time as the night before, I heard the doorknob to my bedroom door jiggle a few times. It was undoubtedly her, which the next day I confirmed when I asked my dad if it was him, and he said no. After she left that night, I begged and pleaded my dad to not have her over anymore because she scared me, and it looked like she was going to do something to his medication. I'm grateful my dad listened to me because he stopped seeing Sydney shortly after that. I wonder what she was actually going to do to his medication if she didn't notice me watching her.
That was scary.
Christmas night of 2021. It was a Saturday night. I went up to Vermont to be with my family for the holiday and stay with them for the weekend. I was staying there from Saturday, Christmas Day, to Monday. For Christmas Eve, I went with my girlfriend to her family's gathering. For actual Christmas, I'd be with mine. She didn't come with me, though. Our Christmas gathering wasn't huge, since our family's so spread out over the East Coast. It was my parents, my older brother, his girlfriend, my aunt and uncle, and myself. The house is big enough to accommodate all of us. We all did our family tradition of watching a movie together after dinner with a fireplace going. This year we watched Bad Santa, one of my dad's favorite Christmas movies. After the movie, we had pumpkin pie and ice cream, and afterwards played cards. Around 11, everyone started to get situated wherever they were sleeping. My brother and his girlfriend took one of the 2 spare bedrooms. My aunt and uncle took the second. There was a nice pull-out couch in the living room that I'd be sleeping on, which I did not mind. I liked being able to sleep by the fireplace and tree. It was very cozy. I had the TV on as I was nodding off. When I felt that I was about to fall asleep, I turned off the TV and Christmas tree lights. The fire was breathing its last breaths, and the room was just about pitch black. My memory faded into a dream actually about Christmas and my family. Only in my dream, we weren't at my parents' house, we were at my uncle's house, and more of my family members were there, like my cousin Jackie and my aunt Melissa. It wasn't a very exciting or unusual dream. We were at the dinner table, and suddenly all of my family members in my dream stopped talking, turned and looked at me, and my aunt Melissa said in a very serious voice, "There's someone in the house, wake up." I actually woke up after this, and my heart was already racing for some reason. The way my dream ended genuinely disturbed me. I sat up and looked around the dark room, actually feeling uncomfortable. The super high ceiling of the living room made me feel even more exposed. I heard a creak in the floor where the kitchen and living room meets. I looked in that direction. The fire was completely out now. There was no light in the room. Yet I thought I could see a person standing right where the kitchen starts. I said, "Is someone there?" expecting one of my family members to answer back. They didn't. The silhouette-looking shadow in the doorway of the kitchen was still there, though. I sat up just a little more to look closer at the doorway. The silhouette then started moving. It was a person. "Who is that?" I said louder. Whoever it was went towards the back door, and I heard the back door close. I started screaming for my family to wake up, and everyone came out of their rooms. Everyone. So what I had just seen was none of my family members. So my dad, brother, uncle, and I threw on our shoes and coats and ran out into
At the next stop sign, turn right.
We found a set of footprints in the snow leading into the woods. Mind you, it was like 2 in the morning, and the neighboring houses aren't exactly on top of each other. So none of us were exactly eager to go into the woods following some unknown person's footsteps. We instead called the police, and while we waited for them, my brother and I stood in the backyard watching the woods. The creepy pitch-black woods where someone was hiding, potentially looking back at us without our knowledge. Everyone else was inside, looking to see if anything was stolen. It's surprising.
At the stop
nothing
sign,
of
turn
serious
right
value
onto
was
Lost
missing.
River Road.
But also, it's not like my parents had jewelry or money just sitting out in the open on the first floor. The police officers who came followed the footprints into the woods as far as they could until the trail seemed to disappear or just became impossible to follow. They had not gotten any other calls regarding break-ins that night, at least not to that point. But the next day, nothing was on the news about any break-ins either. So it may have just been a one-off fluke thing where my parents' house happened to be the target of someone trying to steal valuables, like expensive Christmas presents potentially. I'll tell you one thing though. I had a rough time falling asleep that following night in that living room again. The image of that person
In about
the
12
doorway
miles,
still
turn left to merge onto I-93 South.
Snapchat has become a staple in today's social media world. It's a convenient way to contact friends and keep in touch with people. But as we've seen over and over on this channel, there can be a few privacy concerns if you're not careful. Let's just jump right into it and look at 3 disturbing snaps people have received and their backstories. For the sake of the person who sent me this, I'll refer to her as Maria. Maria has an Instagram account with 5,000 followers, which is a decent amount, and so she gets a good amount of attention on her profile from men. Maria has a boyfriend who has not appeared in any pictures of hers on her Instagram. Maria also had her Snapchat username in her Instagram bio, something a lot of people do to allow their acquaintances and friends to add them on the app with ease. This can also open the door to unwanted contacts, though. Although she didn't add everybody back who added her on Snap, she at one point had her privacy settings set to allow all people to send her messages and snaps, even people she didn't add back. So, somewhat often she'd receive messages and snaps from random guys, usually guys that followed her on Instagram. In her words, often older and creepy looking. But according to her, even younger guys managed to look creepy by taking weird angled selfies in dark rooms. Usually the snaps were pretty harmless like this, but one day she received a snap that would lead to her getting the police involved. Maria lives with her family, but often stays at her boyfriend's first-floor apartment. This location is not known to anybody except for her close friends who know of her boyfriend, making it all the more disturbing when she received this snap. It was a picture taken through the window to her boyfriend's bedroom. At the time the photo was taken, it's hard to see it in the dark, but Maria was in the bed napping, and her boyfriend was in the living room watching football. There was no caption to the Snapchat, making it appear to be some kind of subtle threat. Maria didn't open the snap until much later in the night, while going through snaps she'd received from various people she didn't know. By this time, it was a couple hours after the snap had been sent. She panicked and screenshotted the snap and showed it to her boyfriend. From here, he replied to the account on her phone, asking who is this. Upon adding the person back, they saw the account had a pretty high snap score, which for those of you who may not know, a person's snap score represents how many times they have received or sent a snap. This account having a snap score in the 50,000 range meant it wasn't likely just a random spam account. The person replied, "John, LOL." Maria's boyfriend replied back, "We're calling the police," and John replied, "Okay, cool, let me know if you need help calling them." After this, the account blocked her. The couple were left to wonder who this person was. A search through Maria's Instagram followers turned up multiple Johns, but with no last name on the account, it would simply be a guess as to who it could be. That same night, as the couple was sleeping, a crash from the living room woke them up. As Maria's boyfriend ran to check the source of the noise, he found it was the dining room window, which had been shattered, and on the floor was a house brick, presumed to have been taken from a house being renovated down the block. If the couple didn't have a case before, they definitely did now. They called 911 to report the incident. Now that a police report had been made, police would subpoena Snapchat for information on this person's account in hopes to locate the person. The couple was assigned a detective to their case who was supposed to help in identifying the mystery person. However, as the days turned into weeks, little to no information was given. It did become apparent, however, that the Snapchat account had been either deleted or banned because it no longer came up under search results. Currently, Maria and her boyfriend have no idea who this person was, and any thought of it being a prank by a friend was out the window when their window was literally shattered by a brick. It can boil down to a stalker being jealous of her boyfriend, but this would also mean that Maria was followed to her boyfriend's house, and that the perpetrator would know where she lives as well. Luckily, with security cameras becoming more prevalent on houses, these kinds of crimes are becoming more difficult to get away with. But in cases like this, where there's an absence of any cameras, unfortunately people may still be able to pull these kinds of crimes off. 3 months later, and Maria and her boyfriend haven't seen any new activity at either of their homes. This next story comes from a college student named Tom from the University of Kentucky. Tom shares his location on the Snap Map feature, which if you've been around my channel for a while, you know how things can sometimes turn out with that. Tom lives in a house off campus with 4 friends in a downtown area by a bunch of bars. The squad of guys often walk to and from these bars at night on the weekends. The night in question was no exception. Tom was on his way home from a nearby college bar, about a 15-minute walk from the house. At some point while walking home, he was on a quiet residential street with woods on one side, and he heard someone walking behind him. He turned to see a man holding out something in front of him, walking about 10 meters behind him. He couldn't tell what he was holding, but he didn't stare for too long because he didn't want to draw negative attention to himself. He noted that something about the sight of the man seemed ominous, though. The man was behind Tom for a while, until he turned to the block with his house on it. At some point before making it back, the man was no longer behind him, at least not that he thought. It was only after he made it back inside the house that he got a notification that he received a snap from his friend Luke, one of his housemates, who was home at the time. Luke had lost his phone that night though, so receiving a snap from the Snapchat account meant that somebody had his phone. Tom called his housemates downstairs before opening the video. He also turned a screen recorder on to capture the snap, and and this is what they saw. Snap was a video of Tom walking down the street towards his house. It was the man he had seen walking behind him, and what he was holding out in front of him was apparently Luke's phone. They had the idea to check the location of Luke's phone on the Snap map, since he had his location enabled, as did Tom. The location of his Bitmoji was last updated 9 minutes ago, and its location was right on top of their house. So the three guys who are currently home ran around the entire property with all the outside lights on to light up the area. They didn't find the man with the phone, but oddly enough, Luke's Bitmoji moved just a tad as it updated again, yet it was still on top of the house, meaning whoever had the phone had to be somewhere that they were overlooking. After a while, the guys thought to lock the phone using the Find My iPhone feature, and then have it play a sound. When they did this, they were confused to hear the beeping sound of the phone coming from inside the house, followed by stomping of someone's shoes and the front door slamming shut. Luke's beeping phone was still inside the house, but instead of going straight for that, the three guys ran outside to chase after whoever just ran out the front door. By the time they made it out onto the street, they had no idea which way the person went. They were out of sight and they could have been hiding anywhere. After checking the neighbors' yards, the guys went back inside to retrieve Luke's beeping phone, and Tom claims they found it right in the pantry closet, meaning the man was hiding in there for however long. At first, one could have maybe assumed that the person who had the phone was trying to return it, until it was discovered that that person was literally hiding in their house. Assuming all the details in the story are true, if I had to guess, the man who had stolen Luke's phone knew who he was somehow and was following Tom through his SnapMap Bitmoji location all the way up to their house. There are some missing details though, like how the phone was stolen, what the method of entry to the house was, and if Luke and the rest of the guys in the house had any sort of enemies or people out to get them. No police action was taken apparently. In 2015, an Australian Redditor with username Skinna555 took 3 Snapchat videos of his parents' exotic birds and put them on a Snapchat story. What followed next was downright disturbing. Skinna and his girlfriend recently moved into his childhood home with his parents while their own house was being built. Skinna's parents owned 3 Australian parrots, and one night while he was home alone, he uploaded 3 Snapchat stories showing off the birds, since many people always asked about the birds.
I'd say the first one of my parents' little birds is this little guy. It is little Leo. He's a cockatiel. The second little bird of my parents is a rainbow lorikeet. His name is Oliver. There he is. And here I am, my good little mate. Nothing.
About 15 minutes after uploading the videos to his story, Skinna receives a text from one of his friends, and at the bottom of it, it says, "By the way, what was that in the window behind you in the last one?" So after seeing this text, he went to rewatch the clips a couple of times and opened them on his computer to get a larger and clearer view of the videos. In the last snap, it almost appears as if someone is at the door, looking in with their hands cupped against it. But it's hard to say for sure because of how briefly the door is in the frame. But whatever it was not in the first snap when that same door was in full frame. Skinna was home alone at the time, and to add to the mystery, that door led to the backyard, which was only accessible through a single gate which had been locked. The theory that it might have been a reflection doesn't hold up, because the sliding glass door was half open, and all that stood between the figure and the inside of the room was the fly screen door, which would not have been able to cast any reflections. Whatever was at that door moved in the matter of seconds that passed between the first and third snap. When Skinna was a young child, around 10, he started to commonly experience sleep paralysis, which could get so intense that he'd find himself often not being able to breathe for short periods of time, and this led to a fear of sleeping for him. A couple of years went by, and his sleep paralysis tendencies would worsen. During his episodes, he could not move, felt like something that meant him harm was in the room with him. Around the age of 14, he started to hear and see things like thuds and creaks. However, he always had one recurring vision, a faceless person looking in his bedroom window with their hands cupped up to the glass, similar to this image caught in his Snap story. When he moved out at age 18, he never had another episode. So for a few days after these snaps, nothing happens. But come Friday night, Skinna found himself home alone again. At around 10:15 p.m., while playing games on Steam with his friends, he starts to hear some relatively loud banging, loud enough that he could hear it even through his headset. It was coming from the screen door outside. He got up to film the sounds using his phone. The noises got louder and more frequent. Instead of outright opening the curtains and potentially finding himself face to face with someone on the other side, he walked through the kitchen into the laundry room to turn on the outside lights. Like I mentioned earlier, there's only one entry and exit to the backyard, the left side of the house through a locked gate. So with the back lights now on, he went over to a window that looks out to that one exit of the backyard. While waiting and expecting to see someone rushing out of the yard, a loud noise can be heard from outside on the opposite side of the house. He aims the camera at the window for a few moments, then turns on the kitchen lights, and seconds later stops recording. He kept all the lights on until his parents returned home. He uploaded the videos to Reddit, and people started to help in examining the videos. After a few Redditors enhanced the videos, a big mess in the corner was revealed in the dining room. The figure begins to resemble a person. And to make it creepier, that figure is not there at the end of the video. Skinna called the police, and the video freaked even them out. They believed that a two-man team tried to rob his parents while they were away. Theoretically, when one would-be robber broke in and realized Skinna was home, the second one tried to make noise to lure him inside. And when it didn't work, he snuck out and escaped. Skinna doesn't entirely trust this theory, mainly because all the doors and windows were locked from the inside when they came in. So how exactly would these guys have gotten in? Years later, this just remains to be another internet mystery, and what actually went down, we may never know. This video was sponsored by Babbel. Babbel is one of the top language learning apps in the world. Its intuitive lessons help you learn a language through real-life conversations. I've been using Babbel for over a year now, and it's proven to be very useful to me because of my love to travel. I've used Babbel so far to learn Spanish, Italian, and German, which I've been able to utilize in different countries. A lot of students dread language classes in high school and college, but Babbel takes a more fun and hands-on approach that makes learning a new language easier. My favorite part about Babbel is that it easily categorizes its courses based on specific skills and interests that you're looking to learn. Babbel is scientifically proven to help you start speaking a new language in 3 weeks with lessons designed by real language teachers for a more immersive and personal experience. All you need is 10 to 15 minutes a day.
In 1 mile, turn
Babbel
left
also
to merge
offers
onto
a 20-day
I-93
money-back
South.
guarantee. So if you're interested in learning a new language, click the link in the description to get 60% off your subscription. I've had 3 girlfriends in my life. My current girlfriend, who I've been with for 3 years happily, my first girlfriend in college, and my second girlfriend, Kelly. Kelly was someone who put me through hell emotionally and sometimes physically. I'll start from the beginning. Kelly and I matched on Bumble, and upon seeing that we both attended the same college, we based our conversation off that and any people that we may have mutually known. After seeing each other for about a month, we made it official, and we dated for about 6 months. Like most relationships, at first everything seemed great, and we got along fine. But the illusion of being a happy couple faded after a few months, when Kelly would start becoming very controlling and downright obsessive over knowing what I was doing at all times. The longer we dated, the more I realized she didn't have many friends at all, maybe 1 or 2, that's about it. So when I would go out to see my friends on the weekends without her, She would always obsessively text me every 15 minutes asking me for proof of where I was. If I were ever to be at a bar without her, she'd throw a fit. She'd make me share my location with her after 4 or 5 months of dating. It got to the point I couldn't handle it anymore. She had too much time on her hands to worry about what I was doing constantly. I couldn't even go see my friends without constantly being attacked and interrogated by her. But one night, things escalated far worse than they ever had. Admittedly, I ended up at a bar and very drunk with a group of my drinking buddies. We started at my friend Kevin's house, and I didn't intend on ending up at a bar. When I got home, Kelly was waiting in front of my mom's house for me, with a batshit crazy look on her face. This was one of the first nights that she laid hands on me, repeatedly hitting me while screaming I'm a dirty cheater and other insane things, all while outside, causing a scene
Use
for
the
the
left
neighbors to
lane to
hear.
merge onto
After I had to
I-93
grab
South.
her arms to get her to stop, she shouted things like, "Get off me, I'm calling the police." So I let go and told her we're done. This was officially when I broke up with her, and her response was not good. Every single day, I received paragraphs upon paragraphs, ranging from angry to alleged regretfulness back to angry. Eventually, I felt more comfortable blocking Kelly for a while, but that wasn't the end. One of my friends who followed her on Instagram still sent me a screenshot of the picture she posted with this big, ugly, muscular guy who looked like he wanted to kill the person taking the picture. I made a joke to my friend saying, "Wow, I see she upgraded." Kelly did the unimaginable though. I was all cozy in my bed, in the perceived safety of the house. I was home alone, as I usually was living in my parents' house. That was when I heard a
For about
pounding at the front
62
door
miles,
downstairs.
continue straight.
I jumped out of bed and went out to the living room to listen. There was a man's screams from the other side. He was screaming, "Open up, pussy." I didn't acknowledge him. I didn't want him to know I was home. Then some random number was calling my phone. When I didn't pick up, I got a text from someone threatening to kill me and telling me to open the door before he breaks the window. I ignored these and called 911. I heard glass breaking from outside. I looked out my window and I saw a familiar, huge bearded guy right by my SUV. He was smashing my windows. I recognized the guy to be from Kelly's picture. As I was on the phone with 911, I explained that my crazy ex-girlfriend sent her current boyfriend to my house to threaten me, and he was currently damaging my vehicle. I answered a bunch of questions as police were en route. All the while the man kept screaming things from outside and pounding on my door and sending threatening texts. Police showed up surprisingly quickly to my relief, and they caught the guy still in front of my house. They saw him step off the front stoop after he saw the cop car pulling up. I went outside right away and showed the police my car and the texts, and the big, roid-raging man was still yelling at me that I'm gonna fucking pay for talking shit about him to Kelly. I told him I hadn't spoken to Kelly in months, and he said, "Oh yeah, what about the texts?" as he was in handcuffs already. I said, "What texts?" and he accused me of being a bullshitter. So after he was brought away in one of 2 police cars, I gave the second police officer whatever information he needed of the situation between Kelly and I, and he told me I had a good case for harassment and should definitely file for a restraining order immediately. He told me to head to the precinct the next day, which is what I did. But I also unblocked Kelly and asked her what she said to her boyfriend and why. And after she responded claiming she had no idea what I was talking about, I sent her a long text giving her a piece of my mind, basically telling her about my getting a restraining order and telling her to seek help. I never heard from her again, nor her crazy, roid-raging, now ex-boyfriend. According to my friend, she deleted the picture with him literally the next day after that happened. I currently have a restraining order against both her and her ex-boyfriend, Javier Cruz. Be careful who you decide to date. There's a whole lot of crazy out there. I dated my ex Kian for 2 years. It was a toxic, abusive relationship. I endured a lot of physical suffering from it, but I was always too scared to leave it. I live with my single mom on a rougher side of town, the place where I spent my entire childhood. Being a girl walking home alone at night here can be sketchy, which was part of the reason why I stayed with Kian for so long. He is a big guy, and I felt a sense of protection with him, and he wasn't making me feel like shit. A big reason I stayed with him, though, towards the end was because I was scared of how he'd take it if I broke up with him. My mother always hated him, though, and she knew he was no good for me. Unfortunately, it took me as long as it did to cut ties with him. I did it over text one day, though, because I knew if I did it in person, he'd hit me or go crazy. He still didn't take it well. Seconds after I texted him, he tried calling me over and over. I wouldn't pick up because I was scared. So after the third or fourth attempted call, he started typing for a few minutes, and the text I got from him was a long paragraph cursing me out, a lot of it in all caps. I texted him back that we could talk about it on the phone tomorrow when he's cooled off. He of course sent another paragraph, and I didn't read this one right away because I was about to cry, and I didn't want to deal with it at that moment. My mom was working her second job that night and wouldn't be home till around 2 in the morning. I had class the next day, so I went to bed early around 10, but falling asleep was difficult with my mind racing. Eventually though, I did fall asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound from the outside of my room. I looked at the clock and it was around 1 a.m. It wasn't uncommon for me to wake up to my mom getting home late at night after work. I was just surprised because she was home rather early this night. I sat up and saw something sitting on the edge of my bed. I realized it was my cat Nala. I got out of bed and went out into the hall and called my mom's name. All the lights were out. I knew for certain I heard something from out in the living room. I turned on the living room lights, but no one was here. I went to the front door to make sure it was locked, and it was. I checked through the window to the driveway, and my mom's car wasn't here. So I figured maybe I was just hearing things. I went back to my room and shut the door, then crawled back into bed. Nala was still in the same spot on my bed. She hadn't moved. I tried to go back to sleep, and I suddenly heard another sound. I ran out to the living room again, and my mom wasn't here still. I suddenly realized Kian knew where we kept the spare key in the backyard. What if he had just let himself in? I went back to my room and called my mom on my cell phone and told her. I had already texted her earlier about my breakup, so she already knew and was proud of me. She said she'd be home in a little bit, and that I could just be hearing house noises. I laid back down in my bed. Nala was still in the same position. I turned on the lamp and went to go pick her up. And I gasped when I saw her eyes lifelessly open and she wasn't breathing. I picked her up and confirmed it. My cat was dead. I wanted to cry, but I covered my mouth. I suddenly knew that Kian was in the house and that he did this to punish me. I locked my bedroom door and called 911 and whispered into the phone that my crazy ex-boyfriend broke into my house and killed my cat. I was told to wait in the closet in my bedroom until I heard the police arrive. I stayed on the phone with 911 in the closet, waiting. At any time during this, the front door to the house could have opened and closed, and I wouldn't have been able to hear it. Eventually, the 911 operator told me the police were there. Apparently the door was unlocked because they let themselves in. That meant Kian had probably just left. I went to the living room to find 2 police officers. I was bawling my eyes out over Nala now. The first thing they asked was, "Where is he?" And I said, "I think he left." I showed them my cat and the text from Kian. My mom came home shortly after I called her, and she cried over Nala too. The police were not very helpful at all, saying without any actual evidence that someone broke into the house, they couldn't just go and arrest someone. Nala had no stab marks or anything, so as messed up as it sounds, he couldn't even prove that she was likely murdered by Kian as revenge to me. The next day, my mom had the locks to the house changed. The spare key in the backyard was still there, but Kian easily could have put it back. I blocked Kian's number and all social media outlets. All the evidence pointed to him having done it. My mother and I went through the process of getting an order of protection against him, and the judge issued us a temporary one before our court date. The last time I ever saw Kian was in court, where thankfully the judge determined that the order of protection would remain in place. I still often think about how the first time I went downstairs, Kian was probably somewhere in the living room, hiding and watching me. When I was in junior year of high school, I had my first relationship. His name was Mike. He was a senior at a different high school the next town over. We met through Facebook. He messaged me and we started talking from there. We started hanging out and going to each other's games. I'd go to his football games, he'd come to my softball games. We officially became boyfriend-girlfriend after a few weeks. Since we were in high school though, we didn't go on a lot of traditional dates like dinner or drinks. We were just kids still. Our dates usually consisted of getting burritos, going for drives, or hanging out at his place since my parents were always home and made it awkward in case we wanted to do anything. The best way I could describe Mike, he was a bit of a hothead. He was big for a 17-year-old, that's why he played football. But he didn't hang out with the jocks. He hung out more with the stoner crowd and the regular crowd. At least that's what he told me. I didn't go to the same school as him, so I didn't see who he was with during lunch. I also didn't really meet a lot of his friends. We mostly hung out just the two of us, as opposed to group things. Since he lived kind of far though, and I couldn't drive yet, it did get annoying. And truthfully, I started to develop feelings for this boy Andrew at my own school in my grade. Around the same time I felt myself losing interest in Mike. I wanted to test things out with Andrew, so one night when Mike was asking to hang out, I asked him to pick me up so we could talk. He knew right away something was off when I said that. When he picked me up, we went for a drive, and I told him that I think we should take a break. He refused to accept that I was serious, and angrily demanded to know what he did. When I told him it's just that I felt the spark wasn't there anymore, he got so mad that he punched his dashboard, leaving a big indent in it. He started yelling and scaring me, so I was about to get out of the car, but he stopped me and put his hand on my shoulder and said, "No, no, no," and then asked me not to leave. He told me he's just angry, but that he'd drive me home. He put the car back in drive and started driving us. As we drove, he kept getting angrier, as he kept asking for more details of what he did wrong. He started blowing stop signs, and that's when I realized we weren't going in the direction of my parents' house. I asked him to pull over and let me out, and he yelled no. We were approaching some wooded area, and that's when I started getting really scared. I had never seen him like this before, but he was showing me a crazy side of himself. I got out of the car when he stopped it on the side of some quiet road. He yelled for me to come back, but I didn't. My mom came to pick me up. Mike sent me an apology text later that night that I didn't respond to. 2 nights later, I left my house to walk to Andrew's house, who I had plans to hang out with. He lived only 2 blocks away from me. On my way there, I spotted someone across the street, not too far behind me, walking about the same pace as me. They were wearing a hoodie with the hood up. I couldn't see their face. Foot traffic on our block wasn't too common, but it also wasn't super weird either. The closer I got to Andrew's house, the closer the person across the street got. As I continued up the street, I turned again and saw the person was now on the same side of the street as me. My heart started to race. I started walking faster. According to my phone, Andrew's house was coming up just on the right. I texted him to come outside please because I think I'm being followed. He replied back okay. I turned one more time as I heard the sound of shoes running on the sidewalk approaching from behind me, and I saw the guy in the black hoodie running at me. I screamed and ran as fast as I could for about 5 seconds, before seeing Andrew run to the front of his house in confusion. I turned around again and saw the guy in black running the opposite direction down the street. I keep saying the guy in black, but I know it was Mike. That guy had an identical height to him from what I could tell. A few instances happened after that, like getting calls with no caller ID and seeing Mike's car parked outside my parents' house in the middle of the night. My parents were aware of what was going on, and one day, my dad drove us over to Mike's house and knocked on the front door while I was in the car and had a long, loud talk with Mike's parents. I lowered the windows to listen, and most notably what my dad yelled was that he doesn't care how old Mike is, that it's still harassment, and if he keeps trying to contact me in any way, that we'd get police involved. It worked. Mike stopped trying to contact me after that. For those wondering, Andrew and I ended up dating for around a year. My relationship with Mike was an early lesson in my life to watch out for red flags. Out my South Carolina house on Airbnb whenever I'm not using it. It's a modest 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house by the beach. 2 of the bedrooms are guest rooms, which are accessible to the people renting it. The master bedroom I keep locked with my clothes and certain belongings in there. That room is for me, and I have to keep my stuff somewhere instead of lugging it back and forth every time I go down there. I have a regular lock and then a deadbolt lock on there, so no one's ever getting in there unless they chop the door down or break through the window. But also, it's not like I keep anything super expensive in there, mainly just clothing. This was early last spring. It was still chilly up in Massachusetts where I live most of the year. I wanted to take a drive down to my South Carolina house for the week. For the most part, I work remotely, so luckily I'm able to do this when I want to. Ordinarily, I'd have my usual cleaning lady come and clean the house after each guest leaves. The cost of her service is baked into the price of the rental on Airbnb. But since I was going down right after the current renter would leave, I just pocketed the cleaning lady money and planned on going down to clean it myself. The last renter was a guy named Ramon. Through our messages, he told me he was renting with his fiancée and asked for good restaurants to eat at in the area. He seemed trustworthy. I always prefer to rent to couples or smaller groups of women as opposed to groups of young men, because they're usually the ones to come and get shit-faced and potentially damage the place. I started my drive very early in the morning. It was about a 16-hour drive, stopping only for a quick bite and to use the bathroom. By the time I got to the house, it was about 10 o'clock at night. I went to unlock and open the front door first, before going back to my car to grab my bags and go inside. I was shot from driving. I didn't even bother checking the place out or anything for a mess. I just went straight to my bedroom door to unlock it. I collapsed into the bed without brushing my teeth or anything. For those that haven't done it, a 16-hour straight drive will absolutely kill you. I crawled under the covers, and I was out like a baby in a matter of minutes. You'd think I'd have slept through the night, but no, I woke up in a black room. The clock next to my bed read 11:30 p.m. I had only been asleep for a little more than an hour. Something woke me up. I grabbed my phone to check for any texts out of habit. Then I turned on the bedside lamp. I looked around the room, then got up and went out to the living room. I took this moment to start analyzing the place. I didn't notice a single thing moved. Not a pillow, not a can of beer, nothing. I went to the bedrooms. Both were void of any people, though the covers on a bed in one of the rooms seemed to have been moved. So yes, they did come. I thought they may have been the cleanest couple to have ever stayed in my place. I have a camera set up on the front porch of the house. I never really think to check it unless a customer is giving me any kind of hard time, but I was curious. I opened the app to the camera system on my phone and went to the movement history. It picked up on a man entering the house via the code lock 3 days earlier. Just a man though, he had no woman with him. Strange. I checked for any other movement updates from then until the moment I showed up, which it also caught on video, and there was nothing. I checked it over like 5 times. I suddenly got the chills. I went to the Airbnb app to message Ramon and ask if he checked out okay, even though it was late at night. I went to check the bedroom where I presumed he slept in. I started checking under the bed and in the closets. I was yanking the closet doors open as if I were ripping off a band-aid. Each time, I was greeted with an empty closet. I moved along to the second guest bedroom. Both twin beds in here were still neat and untouched. As I yanked open the last closet he could have been in, I saw that it was empty. I sat on one of the beds for a second to just stare at the conversation between Ramon and I. That's when I heard the master bedroom door click shut, quietly, in a way that a person would have done it, not a draft. I went out to the living room and looked at the master bedroom door. I said, "Ramon, are you still in here?" with a shake in my voice. No response. I could see the light was still on in the room through the bottom crack of the door. I got on all fours to look under the crack of the door, and I fell backwards, and I saw 2 feet standing not far behind the door, maybe a couple feet away. I went to the knife holder in the kitchen planning to grab the biggest carving knife, and it was already taken. By this point, my only logical option was to leave the house and call 911, and that's what I did. I waited out front until the police showed up. Then as we went inside, there was Ramon, waiting in the living room, no knife in hand. He spoke in this Portuguese accent, acting all innocent, saying he just needed a place to stay for one more night, which was complete bullshit. He denied ever picking up the knife, which was conveniently placed back in the knife holder now. After 30 minutes of 2 police officers outside talking to Ramon and 2 inside talking to me, they actually let him go and told me I should contact Airbnb and try to work it out with them. I was just shocked. I felt like the police didn't do their job. After everyone left, I changed the lock code on the door, and I contacted Airbnb about what happened. Though I didn't receive payment for the extra day Ramon squatted in my house, they did apparently ban him from ever using the app again. It doesn't really feel like proper justice though, when he was potentially waiting to stab me in my own house, in my own bedroom. I'm 26 years old, still living with my parents. I'm not content with my job, and I'm in a relationship that I'm not too sure about. To say I've been stressed would be a monumental understatement. My mom and I were not getting along one week, and everyone was just bothering me. I wanted to escape for a weekend. I looked into little one-bedroom Airbnbs up in the mountains, and found one for cheap. It was in Troutdale, Virginia, a couple hours away from us. And based on the pictures, it was this nice, private, and peaceful-looking little place surrounded by woods. It was the fall, too, so the foliage was going to be beautiful. I told my parents I was going there for the weekend. My mom seemed overly happy about me leaving for the weekend. My girlfriend was more so just confused, finding it weird and suspicious that I was going away to some random cabin in the woods alone for a weekend. When Friday came, I packed a backpack full of clothes, toiletries, and my laptop, and I headed out for the road. It was around a 2.5-hour drive door to door. The area of Troutville was very quiet and scenic. It was a perfect escape from suburbia back home. I needed a nice weekend just to spend to myself. I was driving up a gravel road when my GPS told me I arrived. I saw an opening in the trees next to the road. The instructions the owner of the Airbnb gave me were to cut through this opening onto the grass and up the little hill. I did exactly this, and there I saw the cute little house sitting at the top of the hill. The second I stepped out of the car, I inhaled the fresh rural air, instantly feeling happy I did this. The owner told me where to find the key to the front door. I let myself in and checked the place out. It was a nice cozy living room, small kitchen, bathroom, and one loft bedroom that you had to climb a ladder-like stairway to get up into. And there was a circular window over the bed. Lots of light got into the house, which was nice. I went out to walk some of the trails the owner told me about a 5-minute drive away. On the drive back to the house afterwards, I noticed these two guys walking down the gravel road. And as my car was passing, they literally stopped in their tracks to turn and look at me as I passed. I waved and smiled, thinking they were friendly locals, but they didn't wave back. It was completely off-putting. They looked at me as if my driving down the road was a crime. I didn't look back. I turned into the entrance of the property and back up the hill. I started reading one of the books I brought with me in the living room with the fireplace going. It was incredibly cozy. The sun was on its way down, and after reading a chapter of my book, I realized I was getting hungry. I went outside to my car, about to drive to the nearest Walmart, when I noticed two men kind of running into the woods down the hill by the entrance of the property, probably in response to seeing me come outside. I wondered if it was those two guys from the road earlier. It was incredibly strange. I suddenly decided to take my laptop and backpack with me in the car while I was gone just to be safe. On the drive into town, I messaged the owner letting him know about this. He replied saying it's nothing to be alarmed about. There's a lot of teens in the area that walk around. So I dismissed it. I drove like 20 minutes to the closest Walmart since there were literally no grocery stores in the area. I picked up a few food items to hold me over. Some milk, granola bars, fruit, frozen dinners, bread, and cold cuts. By the time I got back to the Airbnb, it was completely pitch black out. There were no streetlights on these gravelly roads. And with no neighboring houses, truly the only light was from my headlights. It was creepy for sure. I pulled up to the hill to the little house. It was almost hard to find in the dark. I grabbed my backpack and the grocery bag and went up to the house in the dark, using my phone's flashlight to see. Once inside, I locked the door immediately. It was creepy out there. I ate real quick and went back to reading my book by the fire, and pretty soon the lights to the room suddenly cut out, and the only light in the entire house was from the fireplace. I tried flicking on anything electric, but the power was gone. I went to message the owner again, who swiftly replied back to check the main breaker in the circuit box outside by the telephone pole near the back of the house. I didn't reply. There was no way in hell I was going out there. I was already paranoid from earlier. And why would the power be randomly cut out anyway? Something was off. I heard a creak in the floorboard from the darkest corner of the room by the bathroom door. I looked over and saw this tall, looming figure in the doorway of the bathroom, lit up only by the fireplace. My worst fear had been realized. This was actually happening. A soft yet deep and disturbing voice told me to remain calm and give him everything I had. I was so scared I could barely speak. I said all I had was my laptop and some clothes. He told me to empty my wallet of all my money, which I did. As he stood in the doorway, I still couldn't see his face. He told me to go into the kitchen and stay there. Moments later, I heard the door to the house close. I looked into the living room. My laptop, backpack, and money was all gone. I called 911 quietly to report a robbery. 20 minutes later, an officer arrived. I described the two guys I'd seen walking down the street earlier that day, assuming it was them working together on this. Basically, all the officer could tell me was that they'd be on the lookout for anyone matching those descriptions. I messaged the owner to tell him what happened, and he was sympathetic at first, or so it seemed. He said I could go home the next day, but he didn't want to refund me for my horrible experience. A trip I thought would be a nice detox for a stressful point in my life only made it worse. Luckily, my laptop was only like $400. I didn't pack any expensive clothing, but it was still the scariest experience of my life. There is a small part of me that believes the Airbnb host may have something to do with it, because I still have no idea how that guy got into the house. So a few years back, after some friends and I graduated high school, we celebrated in the White Mountains National Forest Reserve. We only lived 2 or so hours away, so it wasn't much of a hike. We all packed inside my friend Alexis's car. Also with us was my friend Rob, his girlfriend Stephanie, and our friend Kelly. Alexis's car was a Hyundai Accent, so a very small vehicle. We didn't pack much. We were headed to this Airbnb in Carroll, New Hampshire at the height of the summer. It was a gorgeous drive. Once we got to the house, it was just as depicted in the photos, only the pictures didn't include the shambling-looking shed next to the house. It seemed like it had seen better years. I probably could have knocked it down myself. Alexis joked around that maybe some old, crazy guy lived in there, and that's why the place was so cheap. But we all laughed it off and unpacked our things. I'll be honest, I was really into Alexis, and I think she was into me, on account that she said we should share a bed. More so because the third bedroom had 2 doors leading to the outside and had a perfect view of that old shed. So she didn't want to sleep there, and she wouldn't let me. We both put our things in the living room and made the pull-out couch our bed. Not much happened the first night. A little later, we all sat in the hot tub in the garage/rec room. Alexis sat next to me, and we faced the woods, while Rob and his girlfriend were opposite of us. Rob's girlfriend couldn't step completely into the water on account of the stitches she just got. Stephanie and I were always good friends, and carried on with stories and joked about high school, sipping on our potentially illegally acquired booze. Kelly, on the other hand, was changing and not with us. Rob kicked my leg from under the water and winked, seeing how close Alexis was getting to me, but that wasn't too much of a deal. We tried to plan out our next day, and talked about hiking to Mount Washington and the Flume Gorge. After a good soak, I eased into bed with Alexis and we watched Rick and Morty for a while, until the clock struck 2 a.m. and we sat outside. The stargazing here was supposed to be amazing, and a bit later, Kelly tagged along with us. What happened next was hard to explain. In front of the house was this huge deck that we were sitting on. It was pitch black and no cars were around. More or less, we were in the middle of nowhere. No one really understands true silence until you're away from cars or planes for that matter. The sky was brightly lit, purple, blue, full of stars. Kelly hushed me one time. Just a few feet away from the porch, she heard some crunching, as if something was approaching the deck. There was definitely something walking out there. I waved it off as a raccoon or fox, until the steps sounded heavy, and I looked at Alexis. The fear began to set in as I noticed her gaze was looking towards the old shed where the footsteps had began. Quickly, I ushered the girls into the cabin and locked all the doors. I tried to explain to them that it's still possibly an animal, especially if animals had taken over that old shed. Easily, both of them calmed down. Kelly walked back into her room, and I again laid down beside Alexis. The next morning, I woke up to Rob and his girlfriend cooking breakfast in the kitchen, which was just across the room from Alexis and I. We had a big day planned out. We did quite a lot of hiking, with most of us forgetting what had transpired last night, other than Alexis. When we came back from hiking, Alexis suggested exploring the old shed that was beside the house. Now that it was daylight, nothing that bad could happen, right? And I'll be honest, I didn't want to, but I didn't want Alexis to think I was a wuss. We opened the screen door, investigating the first room. There was an old, rickety rocking chair. It seemed it might break if I tried to sit in it. The next door had one of those brass doorknobs, but it was rusted and dented. I looked at Alexis before grabbing the door, and she groaned as she opened the door. There wasn't much to the room. The floor was dirt. There was dirt-caked windows and some trash on the floor. Alexis made a point that it smelt of cigarette smoke. It may have been the designated smoking spot in the Airbnb. We both shrugged it off and joined the others out back. Rob was starting a fire. Some typical conversation was going on. Rob poked fun at Alexis and I. The sun set and I turned off the floodlight out back to make the ambiance of our fire nicer. Some chuckles and stories are passed around. Rob and I boasting about our feats and whatnot. Then there grows a silence. That same crunching from last night is heard behind us, just against the tree line. Except it was faster and headed in our direction. And just like that, there was a flash of green light lighting up the entirety of the backyard for just a moment. Whatever was running towards us halted, but my thoughts were ruptured by Stephanie's screams as she bolted towards the house. Behind us, a blood-curdling cry or yelp was heard, a deafening sound that at first we thought was a siren. I instantly stood up, yelling for everyone to get inside. Stephanie must have saw whatever it was that made that cry. In my bolt, I accidentally knocked over Kelly, who hadn't gathered the entire scene yet. I turned around to help her up. Rob was already halfway to the house. I ran to help Alexis gather our food items. Last thing we wanted if it was a bear for them to stay any longer. After that, I rushed Alexis to the back door, where Rob was waiting for us with some kind of bear spray. I already at this point had my Bowie knife out. I commanded him to go in, but he yelled at me to go in because he's got the range. The two of us saw this black mass walking along the outskirts of our fire. We didn't stay long enough to find out what it was. After meeting the girls in the living room, we called the police immediately. The officer reported to the house and looked all around with his flashlight, finding nothing. He clarified to us that the flash was due to lightning striking a nearby power line or transformer. As for the thing, he said it was likely a Fisher cat or something. But Stephanie said that she saw a man, hunched over, the cloak or blanket hung over him. Needless to say, we didn't stay the next night over. The sheer paranoia of someone or something stalking us in the woods was reason enough. To say the least, we haven't returned to the mountains since. Who knows what's crawling around in those woods. Slamming on the brakes and listening. There was a woman's cry from the left side, in the woods. She was crying for help. I got out of my car and grabbed the baton from my back seat. I walked towards the woods and called back, "Who's out there?" And the woman immediately called back, "Please help me." I began to run into the woods, swiping all the twigs and bushes out of my way. I yelled out to the woman to keep screaming so I could find her. She'd every 10 seconds or so scream help, and I'd approach in that direction, running, screaming back. But pretty soon, I started to realize no matter how far into the woods I went, the woman's yells didn't seem to get any closer or louder. If anything, they were always the same distance, even though I was booking it straight in the direction of the screams. I screamed out, "Tell me where you are," and about 5 seconds later, the woman once again screamed out, "Help." I stopped in my tracks now. I didn't like this. I started to feel like I was walking into some kind of trap. I turned around and started running back in the direction I came. I ran and ran until I could see the flashing headlights of my car on the side of the road beyond the trees. The whole way back, I still heard the woman's screams, but they were still the same distance no matter how much closer to my car I got, as if she were following me back. Was I being stalked? I got in my car and just drove out of there, completely freaked out. I called 911 to report it to the authorities in case they'd want to investigate it. I wasn't sticking around there though, I was tired. friends and family about the strange encounter, I was ready to move on with my life. But a week later, I saw something on the news that made me sick to my stomach. The dead body of a 30-something-year-old woman was found in the woods by a man hiking with his dog. Oddly, there were no signs of foul play. The location that the body was reported to have been found is the same general area where I heard the screams. While that patch of woods is very big, I can't help but feel that would be a huge coincidence. I was driving from Brooklyn to Vermont to my friend John's cabin to have a weekend of snowboarding. I had two cars at the time of this story, a 2013 BMW 3 Series and a 2006 Ford F-150, which I was driving on this particular night. I had my snowboarding gear in the bed of the truck. I was about 45 minutes from my buddy's cabin at this point. It was late, like 10 p.m. It was pitch black on these roads, and it was snowing. There were like no other cars on the road up there besides me at that hour. I had just gotten my truck back from the mechanic a few weeks ago. I frequently had problems with that truck, and that night was no exception. At perhaps the worst possible time, on the quietest, darkest road, suddenly my engine starts to completely overheat into the red zone. I slow down and pull onto the side. I wait for it to cool down again. Then I slowly got back on the road. But even at a slow speed, the needle went back up to the red, and the engine was overheating again. I had to pull over and turn off the truck. I went under the hood to try and diagnose the problem, but I couldn't in the dark and the snow. I had to call John. On this road, the reception for T-Mobile was non-existent. I couldn't even call for help. In the moment, I felt screwed. I went into the truck to turn it on again, and at least wait in the heat of the truck as it idled. It didn't seem to overheat while idling. I tried one more time to drive, but the same thing happened again. So I had to wait like 10 minutes before I saw a car passing. I had my hazards on, and I opened the door and waved my arms. The passing car stopped. It was some little Toyota. The guy rolled his window down, and I thanked him for stopping and asked if I could use his phone. He asked what happened. I told him my truck was overheating. It was undrivable. He then asked me if I'm all alone. I paused for a second and said, "Yeah?" He reached for his cell phone and handed it to me. He must have been a local because he had bars. I called my friend John. He picked up, and I asked him what I should do. He told me to call this specific towing company nearby, and that he'd come and pick me up. I gave him my exact location, and he said he was going to head over. After that, I called the towing company he gave me and requested assistance. During both phone calls, the guy in his car watched me the whole time. I tried to not look back, though. After my phone calls, I handed the man back his phone and thanked him. He said, "You're welcome," and without saying anything else, he rolled up his window and drove down the snowy road into the darkness ahead. I watched as his taillights disappeared completely as he descended below the top of the hilly road above. I was once again alone. I got back into my idling truck to be in the warmth. I flicked the headlights off for a second just to get an idea of how dark it was out. And when I say I couldn't see an inch outside the windows, I'm not exaggerating. It was pure blackness. I sat in the truck waiting and waiting. I couldn't even do anything that needed an internet connection. I resorted to playing games on my phone for 20 minutes until there was a bang at my passenger side window. I jumped out of my skin as I looked to the window. I couldn't see much of the person. It was too dark outside. The headlights didn't really light up the sides of the truck. I heard a man's voice start begging for help. He was yelling at me to open the door. He was freezing. I heard him trying to open the door himself, but it was locked. I shined my flashlight to the window, but it barely helped in seeing who was out there. All I saw was someone in a really big black coat with the hood over his head. I yelled back, "What's wrong?" And the mysterious man outside replied saying he's lost and stranded and needs to get out of the cold. I didn't trust this. I sat there nervously trying to figure out what to ask him to prove he's not someone looking to harm me. I didn't even figure out what to say before he started aggressively trying to still open the locked door, and then started pounding on the glass even harder, still screaming for help. In the heat of the moment, I decided to listen to my gut. I put the truck in drive, and he realized this and started pounding harder on the window to break it. I drove the truck onto the road and brought it up to 30 miles per hour, despite the damage I was surely doing to the overheating engine. But then I saw something that I didn't expect that made me feel like my heart skipped a beat. As I came over the hill in the road, I noticed reflection of taillights approaching me on the side of the road. As I passed the parked car, I realized it was that same Toyota from earlier, the one that the man was driving. I slowed down and lowered the window to see if the man was in the car, but I didn't see anything. It seemed like the car was empty. I looked out the window for a second behind the car, and my taillights lit up footprints in the snow, meaning that man who was banging on my window was him. He was trying to trick me into opening the door to do who knows what. I kept driving my truck, knowing full well I was fucking up the engine, but I didn't care at that point. I pulled over a few minutes later, and I saw headlights approaching on the other side, and I wanted to cheer in excitement when I realized it was the tow truck. I flashed my lights, and he pulled to the side. As the driver came out, I told him about what just happened. He joked that he got there at the right time. Then he asked if the guy had a gun or anything on him, but I told him I couldn't see. He replied, well, that we better do this quick. It took him about 15 minutes to get the truck attached, and in that time, the Toyota never passed us. It was possible he turned around and went the other way for this exact reason. I used the tow truck driver's phone to call John again, tell him to just meet us at the body shop. To summarize the rest, John and I still went snowboarding that weekend, and the body shop replaced the broken water pump in my truck, causing the overheating. I sold that truck a few weeks later. I'm glad I didn't lower my window or unlock the doors to that man trying to get into my car. In that setting, I could have been murdered, and no one would have ever known who had done it. My first girlfriend at 17. I lived with my mom at the time because my parents got a divorce when I was 11. One day, I asked my girlfriend on a date, and she was down. We both had jobs. I worked at a local grocery store, and she worked at a Starbucks. We both worked the day shifts, and we were also in our senior year of high school. The reason why I asked her on a date that day was because it was a Friday, and we barely had any homework. After work, I picked up my girlfriend from her house, and we went to a small restaurant 10 minutes away from my house, because that's all I could afford at the time. We ate, then we went back to her house to spend some time together. And then it was dark. She complained how our date night was short, and I told her I can't take her anywhere else that had to be paid for. We came to an agreement that we were going a night drive. We drove in town, and we drove on some empty road in the woods. Eventually the pavement ended, and we were on a dirt road. I had to pee really bad. I told my girlfriend, and she had to pee as well. We pulled over and got out of my car. For some reason, right when we got out of the car, we smelled an awful, indescribable smell. I excused it as another person who also pulled over to do their business. My girlfriend actually gagged from the smell. I told her that we would pee real quick, then go back in the car to get back into town. There was a little flat area that was the best place to piss at. We did our thing, and then we were on our way back to my car. But on our way back, we heard a noise come from the left side of us. It sounded like a twig snapping. I was afraid it was an animal, so we rushed back to my car. Before I had time to open my car door, I heard a scream of fear or pain in the direction my girlfriend and I just pissed at. I told my girlfriend to get in my car while I go investigate. She begged me not to, but I did it anyway. To make her feel safer, I locked the doors. I went the direction to where we were, and I heard that scream again. For some reason, I lost all of my courage to investigate now that I heard it much closer. But when I heard it, it sounded like from the same direction that my girlfriend and I heard the twig snapping. Instead of going that way, I went on my phone and turned the flash on and took a picture. Once the flash went off, I saw a man in a white shirt with black stripes, with some blue tarp right in front of him. He was just standing there. I didn't hesitate to dash to the car. I unlocked the doors, got in my car, put it in drive, and floored it. My girlfriend kept asking me what happened. She saw I was scared. I told her I would explain later. We got back in the shadier side of town, and drove back to my girlfriend's house. We entered the house and went into her room. That's when I told her I saw the man with the blue tarp in front of him, just standing there. I showed her the picture, and she was just as creeped out as I was. She let me spend the night because we were creeped out. It was a Friday. We also had no work or school the next day. That was by far the scariest moment of my life. We aren't in a relationship anymore. I'm 23, she's 22. But we remain as best friends. It was late summer of 2011. I I was almost 19 and was hanging out with my best friend who was a few years younger than me. We live in a very rural area of southwestern Virginia, about 15 minutes from Mount Airy, North Carolina. Around here, pretty much everything closes by 10 p.m., so you have to find your own ways to pass the time. But that was never a problem for us, as we could always find a way to have fun. The night started out harmless enough. First to the mall, then cruising the streets looking for girls, things any teen guys would be up to. When that proved to be unsuccessful, we just decided to go bowling until they closed. We then went to Main Street a little before midnight, just to walk some of the back alleys, acting like the edgy badasses we thought we were. But we never felt like we were in any danger, as there isn't much violent crime in the area. After we walked all the streets, we got bored with this and decided to grab a bite from Waffle House, as this was pretty much the only late-night dining option at the time. After we ate and made a quick stop at Walmart, we still weren't ready to go home, so we set out driving around some of the backcountry roads. This was nothing new to us. As I said, around here you have to make your own fun, and late-night drives were always our thing. The stretch of road we were now on, I had only driven maybe once before during the day, though it wasn't far from where either of us lived. We just had no reason of going down it. While still in Carolina, the road is paved, but within a mile, it enters back into Virginia and turns into dirt. Like most of the dirt roads around here, the county doesn't really give this one much attention since it's so far out of the way. There are very few houses on it. Since the road often washes out in the heavy rains, you have to drive much slower. Being as unfamiliar with it as we were now traveling at a crawl. While we were both more cautious now, it still just seemed as any other road we would drive. Now at this time of night, the roads are essentially empty around here, and with only a handful of houses on this road, we were certain we wouldn't run into any other traffic. The road is mainly all wooded and sits at the bottom of a small mountain. At night, it's easy to overlook any of the houses on it. We probably would have missed them all, if not for out of the corner of our eye, we noticed a light burning. We both looked and noticed a man standing under his porch light. We couldn't make out any features of the man, but we could tell he was watching us, standing completely motionless, with the exception of his head following us. While we were both now on edge, we tried not to think much of it. We figured it was just someone stepping out for a cigarette, and it's just his demeanor that was so uncomforting to us. While nothing came from that man watching us, this was only the beginning. We gradually picked up our speed as we were becoming a little more unnerved the more we talked about it. Within just a few minutes, though, we came to the end of the road, and we were back on the hardtop, a road that I was much more familiar with, and that I drove about once a week. We turned right. We were feeling much better as we could pick up our speed and leave the thoughts of that man behind us. We enjoyed the sights from this road as it travels atop a small mountain ridge, offering beautiful views of the town below. After a couple miles, we had reached the end of this road and made another right to make our way back to my house. This road is a little more wooded than the one we had just turned from, but I was even more familiar with this road, as I drove or ridden it literally thousands of times before. As we're making our way back toward the main highway, we saw something up ahead in the distant reaches of my headlights. Deer are horrendous around here, so we figured that's all it was and slowed down. We began to notice it was much whiter than the brown fur of a deer, but we're both used to seeing the occasional albino, so still assumed that's all it was. As we got closer, we noticed it was no animal at all. It was definitely a human, but hunched over with their back to us. They were walking in the left lane against traffic, as one is supposed to. I looked back at my friend as he asked, "What the hell are they doing walking at this time of night?" I looked back towards the person and could finally make out the shape of an older-looking woman with long, scraggly gray hair, wearing a white t-shirt and white pants. She still had her back turned to us until we were about 50 feet away from her. That's when she turned to us. We got the first look at her face. I don't want to say she was on meth or other drugs, but that's the look she gave off. Deep eye sockets with heavy dark bags under them, greasy hair, and very aged skin. I'm not sure how old she actually was, but if I had to guess, I'd say mid-40s to late 50s. But that wasn't the worst of it. She put her hands in the air and started waving them frantically and running towards us. When she did, we could see what looked like dried blood all over the front of her shirt and pants, as well as what looked like a big knife in one of her hands. We weren't sure what she wanted, but that desire to be edgy badasses was instantly erased. We floored it and didn't let off until we reached the highway. We We were so terrified of the entire ordeal that what would have usually been a 5-minute quick drive to my house became a 35-minute detour, just on the absurd thought that she could somehow follow us there. In small communities like this, you know pretty much everyone, but neither of us had ever seen this woman before, nor did we ever again. We kept a watch on local news for any stories about a bloody woman being picked up, but never heard a thing. I can't even begin to come up with an explanation why she would be walking the backcountry roads at almost 4 in the morning, in her shape and condition, with blood on her clothes and a knife in her hand, with all the risks of human or animal altercation she faced. Fast forward to present day. I now live with my wife on that peaceful road on the mountain ridge, between the two roads of the incident. I take the latter one on an almost daily basis, and still have seen no sign of that strange woman since. Just earlier this year, there was a huge drug and cockfighting ring busted down the road of the Watchman Man. I don't know if it was the same house, or if these people were even living in the area back then. But after all this happened, I've often wondered if that was the same house. Maybe that guy was keeping guard on the place. As for the woman, I just hope I never run into her again. This is an interesting topic that a lot of you have been requesting for a long time, and I've gotten a lot of stories sent to me that happen to people while listening to my videos. Also, you can listen to all of these stories, plus a few exclusive ones on Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music by clicking the link in the description. When I was 15 years old, I would sometimes sleep over at my friend JT's house. He had this cool log bedroom that was its own floor and was attached to the attic through another half flight of stairs. When we were even younger, we used to have big hide-and-seek games in his house with our other friends and his brother. JT grew up in this big house with just his mom and his brother. His dad has always been rich, and after his parents divorced, he still paid for the house for the three of them to live in. His mom was the kind of 40-something-year-old woman to go into town every night dressed in overly tight white pants and such. When I was 14, 15, I didn't really realize what she was going out and doing all the time, but it meant he usually had the house to himself weekend nights. This was one of those nights. We smoked a bit of weed and played hours worth of Super Smash Bros. Then when it got later, we decided to watch some Mr. Nightmare videos, ironically. We were on our third video, Pizza Delivery Horror Stories. This, funny enough, made us want to order a pizza, so we called one of the only pizza places around us open past 10 and ordered a pie. As we finished the current video we were on, we started watching a Craigslist horror story video. Just as we were genuinely getting spooked by one of the stories, there was a crash sound from up in the attic. The sound of a box falling over and its contents spilling out. It sounded like plastic toys. JT and I looked at each other and freaked out. We went to pause the video, and JT screamed his older brother's name, who wasn't supposed to be home. It was our first instinct to assume that it was his brother trying to scare us, but that would mean he had been hiding in the attic for hours, which seemed unlikely. Given we were already watching scary videos, this only made the situation even more unsettling. JT went up the 5 carpeted stairs towards the little attic door and opened it. He flicked on the attic light and went inside as I stood behind watching. He immediately said he saw what it was. It was a box full of Hot Wheels cars that fell and spilled out a bunch of the cars. He left it as it was and said he'd clean it tomorrow. He left the attic and shut the closet door. Right around that time, the doorbell rang, causing us both to jump again. I guess we were both just really tense given the vibe of everything the past half hour. We went downstairs to pay for the pizza and grab plates to eat and stuff. We started eating in the kitchen and planned to bring the rest of the pizza back up to his room. While we were downstairs, though, I actually heard a sound from upstairs, like in the attic. The kitchen was below JT's room. The living room was below the attic, so the living room had a higher ceiling. We walked into the living room to listen, and sure enough, we heard a faint bump that was just loud enough to hear. We again looked at each other with wide eyes. JT said there might be an animal in the attic, because he'd seen YouTube videos where raccoons somehow crawl through a hole in the roof. He somehow convinced me to go check it out. I'm not sure why we were making a joke of this. I think because neither of us wanted to admit how freaked out we were. We went back to his room together, and he gave me this huge flashlight. I opened the attic door, and he was right behind me at the doorway. I turned on this huge flashlight that doubled as a radio and stepped inside. I looked at the spilled over pile of Hot Wheels. Then I looked around this city of piles of boxes. "Why am I doing this?" I said back to JT, and he laughed and said, "Just keep looking." I stepped a little deeper into the attic to look behind this tall pile of boxes, and suddenly I felt two hands on my back push me. I stumbled forward and almost fell, and I heard the laugh of JT behind me. I told him he was a dick, but then, I guess in response to my sudden and loud stumble forward, something moved from beyond this other pile of boxes. I stepped up maybe 2 more feet, peered behind the boxes with the flashlight, and I was petrified. There was a guy hunched over behind the pile of boxes, and he looked right back at me. I ran back out of the attic while pushing JT out, screaming, "Go, run!" I shut the door behind us and screamed that there's someone in there. He followed me outside to the neighbor's house, who apparently wasn't home. We waited on the neighbor's stoop as we called 911. Then we called JT's mom, who seemed kind of drunk, and rushed home from her date or whatever she was doing. The police searched the house to make sure it was clear. The back door was left wide open, indicating the man escaped through there and likely climbed one of the fences to a neighboring yard. My mom called the insurance company and everything too the next day, but shockingly it seemed like nothing was stolen. Nothing important, at least. The man, from what I briefly saw, looked like a young guy, maybe in his early 30s. He had short black hair and facial hair. I was just glad this wasn't my house, because I wouldn't be comfortable sleeping there for a long time. I know JT was scared to sleep in his room for a long time after that. I was on a road trip to Las Vegas one night to meet my friends for a music festival. I was on Interstate 15, which is mostly just desert the whole way to Vegas. I chose to do the drive at night to avoid traffic. I left my house around 8 p.m., and my GPS said I'd get to my friend's Airbnb around midnight. On long drives, I usually listen to podcasts and such because I start getting tired of music after a few hours. I started listening to Mr. Nightmare stories to pass the time, as they made the time seem to go quicker. Given that I was having a road trip, I listened to the road trip themed stories. About 3 hours into the drive, I had to stop for gas, so I added a detour to the route on my GPS, and it showed me where to get off for the closest gas station. It was a few miles away. I got off the next exit ramp into some sketchy-looking area. There were a few houses, then just desert. It was such an odd place for a few houses to be. I pulled up to this generic gas station, the only light source to be seen for pretty much miles. There were only 4 pumps total at this little station. I pulled up next to the one closest to the door to the inside. I went inside to pay the worker for the gas and buy a couple snacks. Not to use a derogatory term, but the guy working there seemed like kind of a hick. He had an unkempt, stained-looking beard, some dirty red trucker hat on, and the way he spoke was kind of creepy. But out here in the middle of nowhere, I didn't know what else I really expected. He tried making conversation with me, asking where I was from. That struck me as him realizing I'm not from around here. I told him I was from Cali. I asked him if he gets a lot of customers here. Kind of a weird question on my part looking back, but whatever. He said not really, not my kind at least. Then he gave me a gross smile. I had no idea what that meant, but it sounded off-putting and like a creepy flirt. The man then looked out the window toward my car and said, "Is that your friend?" I looked outside and got a glimpse of someone walking quickly into the darkness. It looked like they were just by my car. I said, "No, I don't know them," and asked the cashier what that guy just did. He shrugged his shoulders and said he didn't see. Being admittedly an attractive girl in her 20s, I deal with creepy stuff all the time, so I almost wanted to ask the cashier if he could accompany me outside to make me feel better. But honestly, I was creeped out by the cashier as well. I went outside to the pump to start filling up the tank of my car. I looked around the empty gas station lot. There was just a humming from one of the lights of the canopy above me and the sound of the cold night breeze. There were no cars or lights as far as the eye could see. Where did that guy go? What was he doing? I looked at the window of the gas station shop and saw the cashier standing there, looking directly at me. I wondered if he was doing it to make sure I was okay after that sketchy person ran off into the darkness. But that thought was negated when he started waving at me slowly. It was disgustingly creepy, and I wanted to get out of there. I paid for $40 worth of gas. When I was around the 30 mark, I heard something from the small building, like a voice. I looked over to the window, expecting it to be the cashier who made the noise. But he was still inside, just standing at the window looking at me. Then I noticed where the sound came from. There was a man peering his head around the right side wall of the small gas station store. He was waving his hands at me, motioning for me to come over. I'm pretty sure I saw a creepy smile on his face too. I started waving and calling for the cashier in the store. He didn't move though. He just stood there, motionless, looking at me as I called for him and waved my arms. I looked back at the creepy guy who was peering his head around the corner, and he was still there, but now he wasn't hiding behind the wall anymore. He was standing fully exposed until he noticed me notice him, then started walking towards me. He removed the nozzle from my gas tank and left it dangling. I called at the cashier for help one more time. He still just stood there, motionless, looking at me. I felt my heart in my throat. This was a textbook scene directly from a Mr. Nightmare story. I got in my car and sped out of there, back on the basically deserted road, and eventually back onto the interstate. My heart was racing after that for a few minutes. Needless to say, I stopped listening to Mr. Nightmare for the rest of that road trip. I got safely to the Airbnb about an hour after that ordeal. I still have no idea what to make of it. I rent a house in Gulfport, Mississippi. It's a small house, but perfect for one person. I live alone with my dog Gringo. The backyard is big for him to run around in, and the area is pretty nice, right by the beach too. This happened on a summer night, I think a Thursday. I had just finished preparing my lunch for tomorrow and finished cleaning up the kitchen. Before going to sleep, I laid in my bed and ironically was actually watching Mr. Nightmare videos. I always like to think these videos would help me know what to do in a worst case scenario situation like a home invasion or anything of the sorts. I'm sure a lot of people feel that way, but honestly, none of us ever expect something like that to happen to us. Sure, it happens to other people, but never you, right? Well, it must have been like 11:30 at night.